How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Today we're going to talk about chain of command versus open door policy. I'm not talking about the inmate's perspective. I'm talking about staff following the chain of command. What does chain of command really mean? And also, what is open door policy? Is there a conflict? Is it one and the same? We've had this discussion before. It was kind of like a brief vlog. I thought today we can have some panel of experts on, and we could touch in on some topics that relate to, dealing with chain of command, also dealing with open door policies, and just trying to see if we're doing the best we can to respect the chain of command, but still be open to have that dialogue with our frontline staff personnel. So, guys, let me just introduce you to our panel, starting with Connie Eileen, my civilian expert.
Hi, my name is Connie Eileen. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I come to you guys with 10 years of experience on Rikers, another 5 years of experience in Connecticut Department of Corrections, and I really enjoy doing this and being able to share my expertise with everyone.
Thank you, Connie. I'm going to try to control these mutes again. I think I'm doing pretty good. I also have my boy, the director of training for Guardian RFID. Guys, again, if you get a chance, please check out Guardian RFID's YouTube channel. They got a lot of good videos there for us to enjoy. Plus, and I'm sure Greg will touch on it a little more, it's a company that's devoted to our mission. They're devoted to having us recognized. And the owner, Ken Daly, does whatever he can to make sure that we're seen as equals in that law enforcement community. But Greg, do you mind introducing yourself?
I don't mind introducing myself at all. I also want to point out that many of the videos that you would watch on GuardianRFID.com come from the guy with the hat on. So when he says to you, there's a lot of great videos on there, there are, and some of them are even by Tony. But I am Greg Piper, the director of training for Guardian RFID. I've been with Guardian about 3.5 years, been to about 200 plus jails across the country, visiting with corrections professionals and law enforcement officials all across the country, helping them, working with their risk needs, helping them assess how they can be better professionals, gleaning from them and giving to them as many tips and tricks as I can, and supporting them, which is the mission of Guardian RFID. Prior to that, I spent 3 years with the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department, Chattanooga, Tennessee, as a deputy sheriff assigned to the Corrections Division. Before that, I spent almost 10 years with the Kansas Department of Corrections as an officer, worked my way up to a shift supervisor, spent some time in unit team, and then ended as a captain's level position in staff development. Plus, before I was in corrections, I also was in upper management with Home Depot and a few other retail type environments. So I have some of that civilian experience as well in leadership.
Well, Greg, first off, thank you for all you do as well. I know you're go across the country training people, making sure all staff is safe and secured. So I know we all appreciate that. Hey, Rob, first off, Rob, thank you for taking the time to come on. I know this was kind of last minute. I met him through my wife, who just talks highly about this gentleman all the time. He is a devoted law enforcement professional with over 20 years, 25 years as a police officer, but I'll go ahead and have him explain his career. So, Rob, do you mind introducing yourself to my audience?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being on. I spent 25 years in a municipal police department. I started off as a civilian dispatcher in 1987, worked for the Ramsey Police Department in Bergen County, New Jersey. About a year after getting hired as a dispatcher, I was hired as a police officer. I spent 7 years working patrol, answering all types of calls for service. Was promoted to the rank of sergeant after 7 years, spent 10 years as a patrol sergeant, working rotating shifts with my own squad. After 10 years as a patrol sergeant, I was promoted to the rank of lieutenant. I was a patrol commander, one of 2 patrol commanders in the police department. With that came the responsibility of having control over half of the patrol division. I spent 8 years working as a patrol lieutenant, retired proudly after serving 25 years. I spent the last 4 years working in public schools and 3 years Prospect Park, Passaic County, New Jersey, and the last year in Franklin Borough School in Sussex County, New Jersey.
Well, if I may, thank you for all your service. My wife said that every day she knew you were working, she felt safe, and so did the kids. So thank you for taking care of my family.
It was my pleasure. My pleasure.
I appreciate you, sir. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to our sponsor, and when we come back, we're going to discuss chain of command versus open door policy. I think this will be a fun discussion. And guys, If you haven't, two things before we go on onto our break. Check out the video we did the other day about mentoring. I thought that was just a phenomenal video, very deep discussion. Again, it may not be something we're looking for because we don't know it exists, but doesn't mean the dialogue's not good. That was really deep dialogue. I'm hoping to have that same type of discussion today. And also, if you get a chance, check out my boy Randy Sutton. He has Wounded Blue TV. I put all the links in the description of this video. He is doing what he can to elevate us to be seen at that level. I just was interviewed by him today. Hopefully I did okay. The concern pretty much is I wanted to make it known that we need that recognition. So, all right, guys, so if you haven't, the show Tear Talks to you, brave men and women that work in corrections. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. That bell will notify you every time I post a video. I'm going to go to our sponsor. We come back. We'll be discussing chain of command versus open door policy. And I hope Connie remembered everything I said because we're going to do round two at the end. So if anything, stay again. Connie, round two, closing. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it, it's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
Guys, inmate manipulation is a course that is highly needed. It's the process that's so slow moving and subtle that you don't realize it's happening. When inmates choose to manipulate, they manipulate our need to react. Situational awareness and insight is going to save your career. It's going to save you from doing foolish things. Listen to your gut. So the more insight we have, the more we can recognize what isn't so overt, and we can correct our behavior before we fall into a trap that we can't get out of. If you allow an inmate to pull you out of your prescribed role, you are opening up a door for a host of problems. Inmate manipulation, the psychology behind inmate manipulation. Available now. Link in description.
All right, guys, and we are back. So real quick, let's first explain exactly what we mean by chain of command and open door policy. So first I'll start with Greg because we'll get the custody perspective first. Then I'll go to Connie about the civilian perspective. But then I would also like to see what Rob says when it comes to that police perspective. So Greg, do you mind telling me what you think following the chain of command is and what's the difference between chain of command and open door policy?
Sure. Well, because most prisons and or jail settings are what many people describe as paramilitary setups, we have a rank structure within our facilities, as most of your listeners will know, and most of your viewers are well aware. So you have frontline officers, staff, and they can be called officers, deputies, COs. There's many different titles for that. And then we work our way up through the ranks: sergeants, staff sergeants, lieutenants, captains, majors, wardens, and so forth. And in order for everything to work efficiently, we have an order of rank that we need to bring our concerns or our questions to so that the top of the food chain doesn't get overwhelmed. So all the frontline officers that work under a certain sergeant would go to that sergeant, who then will take that information or those questions up to the staff sergeant, then up to the lieutenant, up to the captain, up to the major. If an officer who feels like he's got a question immediately goes to the major, he goes outside that rank or that structure, and it really makes the chain all crooked, and it doesn't give the strength. And that's why it's called a chain of command, because it's only as strong as its weakest link. And if someone in that chain, maybe it's a lieutenant who isn't communicating very well or isn't being used, that becomes a weak link, and that will break the chain. So that's probably the best description of how we, on the security side, view the chain of command, ensuring that orders, questions go up, orders come down and are followed to the letter.
I want to comment on something too, something that you mentioned. I don't want to make sure it doesn't get overlooked. Chain of command also filters information? You said something about the top being overwhelmed. What is that? What does that mean?
So if the top of the folks at the top, which would be, let's just use a major or a warden, if they're overwhelmed with having to deal with the day-to-day minutia, all the questions that surround just the operation, just the running of the facility, the day-to-day things, hey, where do supplies go? We're out of squirt bottles, things like that, that can really slow down the top of the pyramid, if you will, their ability to see big picture, and for them to run and look at what the long-term goals and the long-term plans of the facility are, because they can be bogged down. So in order for things to run smoothly, they need to have clear communication levels, and they delegate those responsibilities down the chain so that they can focus on big picture. So the further down you go, we take care of the more day-to-day, week-to-week operations of the facility.
Right. I love what you're saying there, because also I believe from the immediate supervisor, from the immediate frontline supervisor on up, they should also know what their responsibilities are, what they're able to handle. And also, as you develop, years of being a supervisor, you kind of have some discretion too, where you're able to handle things without kind of always having to notify the next level. I really do think there should be some defined route, I guess, where I can handle this at my level, or if I need to take it up. But the key I like that you mentioned is, again, the filtering of that information so the top doesn't get overwhelmed, which means that a lot of it should be handled on the level down. But thank you, Greg, for that. Hey, Connie, just from a civilian side, is there anything that you would see different when with chain of command being enforced, or how it's enforced?
So I think probably the how would be a little different, just because, if you go to someone above that chain, so say, for example, I have a nurse who comes directly to me about something that's going on the floor. The reality is that nurse should have gone to the nursing supervisor first, and then if the nursing supervisor couldn't handle it, then it would come to me. I think depending on the busyness of what's going on within that chain of command, it could be a significant waste of time and resource pulling in someone at a higher level to deal with something that's more of a day-to-day operational type of thing. I think the other thing I would really want to stress is that when we look at chain of command, we just look at, here's a way of us having clearly defined roles and accountability within those defined roles. And so if you have someone who's kind of jumping through the chain of command, you really are just breaking up how, people are no longer handling things within their scope, which would be the most appropriate way. So for us, I think the enforcement, though, isn't probably as, I don't want to say stern, but I think there is, on some levels, some redirection. You would redirect someone who has come through the chain of command in the wrong way. And if we are unable to redirect, I think then those are those teaching moments. I think, as you talked about, there being sort of this open door policy versus chain of command. I find that I've had people who would pop in just to say, hey, Connie, such and such is going on today. I think that's okay if you just kind of want to hear people out. I think if there's an expectation for me to take action without having gone through the chain of command appropriately, then that's where it becomes problematic.
Yeah, and you hit something right on the head, man, which is basically, especially in corrections, and I'm sure we'll find a little bit on the police side, is that in order for higher level to respect the lower level management, they really have to make sure that that front line really does follow that chain of command, because the last thing I would want to do is circumvent the authority of one of my department heads, because there could be a chance where, you have an employee that's just problematic, that just, does not want to do what that department head says. And then it's like, okay, well, now I go ahead, get involved. Well, what did I just do? I just took the authority away from that department head. So my advice here, guys, if you're going through this is if you're that higher level, you have to find a way, as long as everything's legit. And we'll talk about, when you have to exhaust the chain of command, but as long as everything's legit, you got to do what you can to reinforce that power back to that department head, which means that even if the department head made a mistake and it wasn't intentional, then let the department head fix it. Let the department head go ahead and talk to that employee. But whatever you do, try not to get involved unless you have to, because you always have to have that presence of authority, that perception of authority. And sometimes when you get involved, when it's not necessary, you're taking it away from that level beneath you. And I think that can actually disenfranchise your department heads. And eventually what's going to happen here is that you're just not going to have a good working relationship with them. And we'll discuss micromanaging in a bit, but your department heads really need to have that. They have to have that ability to run their departments, and you have to trust them in doing that. So, but I'm sure, Rob, obviously in police work, you also follow the paramilitary structure. So how important is chain of command being a police officer?
Yeah, it's very important. I think first off, Greg really his definition of the chain of command was spot on. It was perfect, and I agree with what you just said wholeheartedly, Anthony. As far as the agency head, whether it be a chief or a superintendent or a colonel, civilian police director, perhaps, they set the mission for the agency. And where I worked, it was a smaller agency. We had about 35 sworn police officers at any given time. And it was the chief of police who set the mission for the agency. And then it was the responsibility of that chain of command, the captain, the lieutenants, the sergeants, down to the patrol officers, to ensure that that mission was carried out. An example would be, like I said, we were a small agency, a small town, 6 square miles. We could have a situation where we'd have residential burglaries occurring. And the chief may say, for example, I want patrol to concentrate on the residential areas, heavy police presence to try to catch these burglars who are burglarizing these homes. The lieutenant decides on his own, no, we're not going to do that tonight. We're going to go do DWI enforcement, perhaps. That's completely circumventing the chain of command. And then, if a burglary occurs, like Greg said, having that weak link, that lieutenant taking it upon himself to not abide by the mission of the chief could completely just snap that chain of command. And I think that's a real issue.
Right, and I like how right now we're all actually on the same page. We obviously know how important the chain of command is. That's what we're stressing. I want to start with Rob first, then we'll go to Connie and Greg. We'll go backwards. But I want to talk about chain of command both ways. Greg mentioned something really good about top-down communication and then bottom-up communication. And obviously, to me, that communication is essential in regards to that chain of command. And I want to make sure that we understand how important it is that is a trajectory, that, if there's orders from top, that we do what we can to pass those orders down to the front line without, kind of like I believe Rob had said it first as well, where you want to make sure if I pass something that has to be done at the highest level, that it's being done to the front line the way it's expected to be, but also the bottom up. So basically, does the front line actually understand what's being asked of them? So we're basically talking here through chain of command, effective communication. How do we make sure that we're respecting the chain of command, but that we're making sure all elements from the top down or the bottom up is being understood? So would you like to go first with that, Rob?
Yeah, sure. And I think, like you said, communication is key. To me, law enforcement, what's the definition of law enforcement? It's the never-ending search for information. And like I said earlier, if the chief of police has a mission, he has to, number one, clearly identify what that mission is. Make sure that his captains, his lieutenants, his sergeants understand what that mission is. And if they don't, they have to ask questions. We have to know exactly what his thought process is, what he wants us to do. Because we can't have patrol officers going out on the street not knowing what the exact mission of that chief, superintendent, civilian police director is. So again, it's all about communications, about finding out what exactly is wanted and what exactly that administrator wants us to do.
Now, Connie, you were at some high levels. How were you able to make sure that what you said made it all the way to the bottom nice and clear?
I think it is a matter of also being able to connect with people at all levels, because I feel that oftentimes you might give a directive or you have a certain expectation, and then, things happen, right? I don't think necessarily that folks in the chain of command just decide not to follow the chain of command or decide not to follow, here's the direction that we're going in. Things happen and things get lost in translation. But I think sometimes it's a matter of just checking in with people just to see, does everyone know what this is about? Does everyone know what the expectation is? Is everyone all on the same page, as opposed to assuming that whatever you now have on your page is going to automatically get flown down? I think that part of that, though, is making sure that each person within that chain of command understands their level of empowerment. So here's the expectation within your chain, and here's what you are empowered to do within that space. And until that information is clear, because I think that's part of why some communications don't get to where they're supposed to go, because some people just aren't sure. Like, is this information for public consumption? Can I actually share this information, or is everyone at all levels actually privy to the information? I feel that sometimes there's just some confusion, and also depending on the sensitivity of the message sometimes may make people feel more or less comfortable sharing it down the chain. So I think there's a lot to be said about communication as it relates to the chain of command and people actually following through.
Right. And you know what's great about what you're saying? As we're talking about chain of command, let me make sure I have Greg unmuted. I'm actually thinking of, hey, Greg, can you unmute yourself? Because for some reason it's not allowing me to do that. Thanks. For some reason I'm thinking, I don't know if you guys remember the telephone game, you know, where you have like a bunch of people and then one person says it at the beginning and by the end it's all scrambled. We can't afford that in our line of business, right? So we have to make sure that, like, if I didn't hear you the first time, doesn't mean I turn around with that bogus message and go ahead and tell my sergeant now. No, it's like I got to stop and say, hey, wait a second, sir. I'm not understanding what you're trying to get across, because if I don't understand it, then the message comes out half-ass, and then it's going to come out half-ass again. It's going to lose what the mission's about. And then what happens is the people that suffer the most, Greg, and I'm sure you would agree, is the front line. If there's no proper clarification at the high level of what has to be passed down, then the problem is the front line's going to take the blunt of that, and most likely it's the front line that's going to be held responsible.
Yeah, you know, Steve Jobs was a notoriously huge, big world thinker, but not great at letting his people know exactly what that vision looked like. He had these great visions, and he was a visionary. He was a genius. So what I took from that was, if I'm with a group of, and I hate the word subordinates, but you get the idea. When I was a captain, I had my lieutenants, and I'd say, okay, this is the plan, this is the action, and I would tell them what I wanted implemented, and then I would say to them, tell me what you heard, and give them the opportunity to tell me back what they heard and what their role in it was. Now, if they disagreed, we'll get into that here shortly, you know, about what do you do and how can you speak your mind and things like that. But as far as the communication level, if I'm a supervisor, I ask for, what did you hear? Say it back to me so we're clear. Because again, we play the telephone game all the time in my family because of that very reason. It does get misconstrued. Words mean two different things. Language barriers, regional dialects, all sorts of things get in the way. So as it works its way down, it's imperative that the frontline staff hear what the warden's mission or his goal was, but it's got to get percolated through those folks. And so we have to ensure that the folks directly below us understood exactly what we said. And if I'm the subordinate, I ask, is this what you want me to do, so that there's clarity both ways.
Right. And I want people to know that when we talk about chain of command, I think we pretty much said it clearly now. Chain of command started with Greg saying it first. Chain of command goes both ways. And a lot of people say when you got to respect the chain of command, they probably only see the bottom up. They don't also realize that, yes, the top down also has to make sure that they respect it, because at any time they can circumvent the level of authority of their subordinate, that let's say that department head or that next level down. So that authority, you don't want that circumvented from any level, or like top down or bottom up. So we have to remember that we have to reinforce it both ways, bottom up and top down. I'm going to go to Connie first on this, because this was something that we were discussing on briefly before the show started. And then I know we're going to start crossing into open door policy, but I do want to touch a little bit more really specific on chain of command, just to get an understanding. So then when we talk about open door policy, we can kind of get a good understanding of where the conflicts are, because we hit some points. But I want to talk about how chain of command reinforces professionalism. So, Connie, do you, from the civilian side of things, how does chain of command reinforce professionalism in the workplace?
So I believe that it gives more of a structure. So here it is, we are expecting a certain type of behavior in the workplace, and we're expecting respect, and we're expecting open communication. We have a lot of expectations, I believe, in the workplace. And so I believe that when you circumvent the chain of command, there's a way that you're being disrespectful of someone else in their role within their scope, and whether that is you don't think that they can address the issue that you're bringing forward, or you would rather talk to someone else as opposed to the person. I think I believe that with the chain of command, it kind of holds people accountable for what they should be addressing. And so even if you come to me and it's not within my scope, at least you came to me, and then I can escalate it to the next person to address the issue. And if that person can't handle it, they will escalate it. But I think when you begin to kind of jump and pick and choose, I think it really shows a lack of respect for the person you should have been speaking to.
Yes, first off, I agree. And also I believe that, and it's funny here because even though the discussion would have been us really pushing on front line to respect that chain of command, a lot of us seem to be going back to that upper level, respecting the chain of command. I guess for some reason, we're seeming to devote our attention how important it is for the higher level to reinforce that. I think sometimes people don't realize that, it really starts from the higher level. If that higher level, is adamant about, really devoted to that chain of command, then we're going to have that respect from the front line. I know you want to say something, Greg. So, Greg, you can unmute yourself.
One of the things that I try and teach in my classes, and I've tried to teach this for years, is we're all used to the pyramid theory of, okay, so here's our company, here's our facility, whatever, and here's the top brass, then here's these folks, and then the middle, and then work our way down. I absolutely believe the most successful companies, the most successful prisons, facilities, organizations are actually run like this, where the top brass are at the bottom, and they work for the folks that they have below them, their subordinates, and those folks then work for the folks above them, and so on, so that literally the top is actually the frontline staff, the folks doing the actual work. So I felt it was my job as the captain to work for my lieutenants, to do everything I could to make them successful, to hold them up. Then their job was to work for the sergeants, and the sergeants to work for staff, because they're the ones with the contact with our customers, whether it be inmates or civilians or citizens, whoever it is. But I believe the most successful companies, it is the reverse pyramid theory, where I'm working for the people who are technically under me, but it's my job to make them successful. So that's why I think it's critical we understand that in order for the chain of command to work, the major or the warden, they have the right to wander through a facility and talk to staff and make suggestions, but they really need to run those through their direct chosen ones so that it can be effective and they still pay homage or respect to those who've earned that rank.
Right. I actually, as you were discussing that, I actually saw Rob nodding in agreement. Rob, would you expect, I mean, you were a lieutenant, you were on the administrative level. I mean, what do you feel about Greg's theory of the inverted pyramid, where management does what it can to work for the levels below all the way down to the front line?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it goes both ways. I think, if everybody leads by example, for example, that's a supervisor or an administrator, that goes a long way. Me, for instance, I was always the first guy to show up for work and the last guy to leave. When I was working as a patrol officer, I had a sergeant who would come in at the last minute. He'd be the first guy to leave, and a lot of times we'd come in on a late call, we'd have a report to be signed, he'd be gone. If we had questions for him, he'd be out the door halfway home already. And I told myself, if I was ever fortunate enough to get into a leadership position, I wouldn't be like that. And I think I was accurate in that. I led by example. I was the first guy in, last guy to leave. I'd make sure that I was there when guys came in at the end of their shift to sign the reports, to answer the questions that they had. So yeah, I think what Greg says really goes a long way. I think that it's really incumbent upon leaders to be there for their, and he said subordinates, I don't like using that word either, but for their people, to be there for them when they have questions or when they need direction. That's the role of a supervisor or a leader, I think.
Right. Now, before we touch on open door policy, there are times where chain of command, I'm not going to say we're breaking it. I'm just saying it's more of like we're going to exhaust it, because maybe there'll be times where we just have a concern with our immediate management that we may have to go around that person to get to the next. But again, usually when that happens, that's because I would like to think there was a failure that cannot be reconciled by that immediate supervisor. So I don't want to give someone the leeway to say, okay, I have a problem with this supervisor, I can go to the next level. So let me just paint a picture here. If I was third in the chain, right? All of a sudden this officer, let's say, has a problem with a sergeant, and they come to me. As let's say a lieutenant, I'm going to try to see if I can find out what the concern is, and did that concern really have to be brought to me? Now, let's just say it did. I'm still going to want to go to the sergeant and try to give them all opportunity to fix it. I want to reinforce that sergeant's perception of authority. So I'm going to try to give it back to the sergeant. Now, there'll be times when you can't do that. There'll be times where, maybe that supervisor is totally in the wrong. But again, they're still not a violation of the chain of command. It's just been exhausted. I've been to that level. It's not working. But again, you're going to have to explain to me as the next level up as to why you felt you had to come to me. And then I'm going to have to make a decision of whether I can go back down and redirect it to that supervisor so that they can go ahead and fix it, or do I have to get involved? But I will tell you one thing, and I want people to realize this, because this is where micromanaging gets involved. Micromanaging is horrible at any level. It makes your employees hesitant. It's just not something we want. Now, as a supervisor, before I make that decision to go against my immediate supervisor, I better be able to justify it, because there are severe consequences if I just decide to get involved in every little thing and just slowly start taking the power away from my immediate supervisors. Now, Connie, from the civilian side, are we on the same page? Like, is there times where, you would want an employee to come to you if there's a concern, but there are times where, let me go ahead and give that back to my subordinate so they can go ahead and address it to their subordinates, right, Connie?
So there are absolutely times where, people may come in and they want to talk to you about something that may involve the supervisor. And I feel like those are the times where it's appropriate to come and talk to me, because you wouldn't necessarily go to the supervisor to talk about that issue. Not necessarily an issue that the supervisor should have addressed, but maybe the supervisor might be part of the conflict or the issue at hand. Outside of that, it's been my practice that if someone came to me with something that should have been addressed by someone else, that I would redirect them to the person that it should have gone to. I think sometimes those are just those teaching moments, and those are those moments to reinforce, here's the expected behavior that I have of you.
Now, Greg, are we on the same page with how important that redirection is to make sure that that perception of authority is given back to that supervisor, and we do whatever we can to limit that frontline employee from circumventing that supervisor's level of authority?
Yes, I believe there are only 3 occasions when if we're going to use this three-tiered system that you're referring to, when this middle sergeant, in this case, there are only 3 examples of when that sergeant should not be involved. And that is, and they're going to be involved eventually in these, but the officer has the right to go direct to the lieutenant. And that's if the sergeant is doing something that is illegal, illicit, or immoral. If the supervisor is doing one of those 3 things, then by all means, you go to the lieutenant right away. But in all other cases, the officer will grow more by confronting in a professional way the supervisor and saying, hey, I really feel like we're not jiving, we're not getting along, we're disagreeing on this, and we have to come to some sort of professional agreement. You've got to sit down and try and work through it. Now, maybe you use the lieutenant as a moderator or a mediator to help bridge that communication, and you may agree to disagree. But that supervisor still got that rank, still got that collar brass, so you've got to give them that respect. And if for some reason you've gone to that sergeant, and there's just you can't break through, you've tried everything you can, maybe you go to a different sergeant first to see if there's something going on there. But by immediately breaking past that sergeant, going to the lieutenant, you're only harming the structure of the whole facility if you don't give yourself and that sergeant a chance to maybe just figure out if there's a different way to communicate. Unless, of course, like I said first, the sergeant or the supervisor is doing one of those three, illegal, illicit, or immoral, then you have every right to just go straight to your lieutenant.
Right, and again, I see Rob nodding his head, obviously in agreement. So again, we're seeing the parallels between chain of command being enforced from a custody level, from a civilian level. But what's your thoughts on what Greg and Connie said in the police world?
Yeah, I think just as human beings, there's going to be times when there's conflict. There's some people that we just don't get along with, and it might be a patrol officer and his sergeant or her sergeant. But like Greg said, unless one of those instances occur where it's something that's completely off base, illegal, immoral, illicit, I think were the three that he said, you're going to have to work it out. You still have to respect that rank. That person got that promotion for a reason, and you have to respect that rank. You may not respect that person as a person, but you have to respect that rank, and you have to try to work these things out. Like I said, as human beings, there's going to be times when we don't get along, but we have to work together.
Yeah, because I think that once you allow that to happen, it opens up the door for it to be manipulated. I think that chain of command is there for a reason. And if you start to allow this dialogue or just people coming in trying to circumvent that immediate level of authority, you yourself could be manipulated if you go ahead and react to it in a manner where let me go ahead and get involved and not really try to motivate your supervisor to get involved. Like, okay, you have a problem with the supervisor. Let's see how I can redirect this communication back between you two, because that's the key. I still want to keep that chain, because once you open up that door, that person's going to come back again, and they're going to come back again. And then at one point, all you're doing now is stripping your other supervisor from their position of authority, especially if they're doing the right thing. And then what's going to happen here is other frontline staff is going to come to you. That immediate supervisor now they're useless. They got no level of power because you inadvertently took it away. So I think that's very important. Now I want to start crossing into, one more thing about chain of command and emergent situations. So I'll start with Greg first. This is where it becomes zero tolerance. If there's an emergent situation going on, there is very little room to circumvent that chain of authority. So again, that's something that has to be reinforced. That's why I agree with you guys, is that you should always keep the practice of maintaining that chain of command, because when you have an emergent situation and you're not practiced at keeping that chain of command, all of a sudden you're going to see how bad of a consequence it's going to be during an emergent situation where you go to expect chain of command and that immediate response, but now you have supervisors who have lost their credibility because management is micromanaging them or just getting involved. And now when an emergency situation comes, the subordinates don't have enough respect to follow their immediate supervisor. Right, Greg?
Absolutely. For those of us who have been in this industry a long time, right after 9/11, we really all trained heavy on incident command trainings. There was ICS 100, 200, 400, 700, 800, all these courses about incident command structure and how do we have multi-jurisdictional events and who delegates to what and all these different roles. And, we laughed and we joked about the fact, man, I got to take all this training. But it really boils down to the fact that the training created such a muscle memory for my team and I to know that when we got into a hits the fan moment, that structure had to be in place for effective communication. So you've got to practice it every day, even with the small things, so that it becomes a regular occurring thing. So when the big moment happens, when the meteor strikes, when the train derails, when there's a, God forbid, I hate to use the word escape happens inside the prison, which doesn't happen in Tony's prison ever. But when that happens, you're ready and you're prepared. So we do have to practice it in the little things. Be faithful in the little things, and you will be rewarded in the big things.
Well said, Greg. I obviously I totally agree with you 100%. And Connie, I got to ask you something, Connie, because you were at a very high level. You were on the administrative end. Have you ever found yourself, because I know I have, so I'm only asking this question because I'm also guilty of it. And I'm sure the person that's going to watch this video is probably going to be shaking their head because they know I'm guilty of it. Because, again, we'll be discussing open door policy, but sometimes I get that confused with chain of command. But, Connie, have you ever, not intentionally, but have you ever violated chain of command at the high level?
Me? No way. No, so it happens. Like, so I think the reality is that sometimes something comes up and you just want to take care of it. You want it done. Like, you don't want it to be a thing that's lingering because you can see where this is going to head. And so sometimes you just need to do that. There are other times where I've waited in respect of the chain of command, and that wasted time had a negative outcome, right? So like, you got to really try to gauge what's happening in the situation and do the best you can with the information that you have. And you don't always have the best information, but I think we have to we have to be very diligent about deciding. So like, if you know that there's that one person that you go talk to them, they're going to get it done. Sometimes it's easier to do that than to go through the chain of command. And so I've found myself not always defaulting to the person who I know is going to get it done, because I do want to be respectful of the chain of command. So it happens, it's not intentional, but depending on the situation, sometimes you do it.
Now, I want to start touching on open door policy. Now, here's the funny thing, guys. A lot of people, this is like, it's weird because a lot of people from the front line always say, we want to see management more walking around, and we want to see this, we want to, and deep down inside, I know for a fact that nobody really wants to see management walking around. I know it's crazy, but it's true. You know, I understand that you want it or you say you want it, but trust and believe when management's there and everybody's got to try to be perfect, they get stressed out. So I can see people in the background like, man, why is he touring again? You know, why is this person? Well, because you want us here. You told us you wanted to walk around. Then when we're here, you don't want us here. But the thing is there's a controlled dialogue that I like to have between us and that front line. And what I mean controlled dialogue is I'm listening to concerns, don't get me wrong, but I'm not taking myself off the path of what could have been given to an immediate supervisor or what should really be given at my level. So there is a level where I want to know what's happening, but I also want to control of who gives me that information at first, unless there's a reason for me to go ahead and not trust the person that's giving me the information and then try to go one more level down. But the conflict that we had last time we did this discussion is that a lot of people think that chain of command conflicts with open door policies. And I'm thinking like, well, I don't know. I think they both can coexist as long as there's an understanding of what type of communication defines a chain of command type dialogue and what type of communication defines an open door policy. So starting with Greg first. Greg, what would you think would be the difference between chain of command and open door policy?
Chain of command is critical to the day-to-day operation of the facility, and that's making sure that everybody knows what direction the information flows, both up and down. But true growth, and I think it's more critical outside of a paramilitary or a militaristic or a law enforcement type environment, but still important here. True growth, everyone is capable of coming up with that aha moment idea. And so in order to let people have the freedom to come in and express themselves once in a while, whether it be, hey, I'm going to be in my office and the warden says, if you want to stop by and chat for a minute, just to let him know he is a human being. He was there. He or she was a human being. They were there, were available to talk, to just kind of share ideas or enlightenment. This is not, it's not a bitch session. It's not a chance to unload on your supervisors. It's just a chance to have, if you will, a public forum. Because sometimes people feel, you know, I never wanted to aspire to be the warden because I didn't know the warden. Well, maybe if you sit down and visit with him for a few minutes, you realize he started just like you did. Now, maybe a conversation with him gets your wheels turning that, gee, maybe I should aspire to that and go out and get my degree and then try this and grow this direction. So an open door policy allows people to have a free flow idea, but those whose office has the open door, they need to be aware that it's not an opportunity for folks to circumvent the chain of command. So it is a slippery slope, but I think it can be done successfully.
Right. So I'm going to go to Rob now. By the way, I agree. I think that we should, when you have the open door dialogue, it should not be an effort to circumvent anyone's level of authority. It could be like a change of information. But again, you always have to be wary of, is there anything going on that conflicts with, something that your supervisor is doing? And then at that point here, you got to be careful of what you go to implement, because now you could be circumventing that level of authority. But when it comes to open door policy, let me just make sure I have Rob unmuted. I'm learning this as we go. Do you see a very thin line between open door and chain of command?
I do, and I think there's that line really cannot be crossed. I have no problem, for instance, with a patrol officer going into the office of the chief of police, for instance, if the chief of police has an open door policy, if they're going to talk about their vacation plans or what they did last weekend. But the minute that patrol officer starts bad-mouthing his sergeant or his lieutenant, that's when the line's crossed. It's incumbent upon both the chief and the patrol officer to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Kai, let me ask you a question. When it comes to the open door policy, who do you think should encourage that dialogue? Do you think the dialogue should be really encouraged and controlled by higher level, where they make sure that even though we're having this open dialogue, we're maintaining a dialogue that doesn't circumvent that level of authority? Or do you think it should be something that front line should encourage?
So I think it should be encouraged from the top. We want to be able to promote supervisors, managers, whatever, at all levels to have a positive working relationship with their direct reports. And so that's not saying they should be coming into your office for a session to just badmouth people. But there are times where you have people saying, hey, I was thinking about going to do some training or something like that. And sometimes they are coming to look for just some quick advice or a quick word. I've had nurses who'd come in and say, hey, I think we could do something different with the sharps. It's like it opens the door for just some easy exchanges of information, but positive ones. I don't think that it has to be, I think that when the conversation begins to go left, that we are responsible for terminating those conversations or redirecting those conversations to the right place, because then you do become the place that they come to vent. You become the place that they come to. And then if something does go down, they now can say, I spoke to that person and they were aware, but they didn't do anything. And so you can't unhear something, and you can't not address it as a manager, as a leader. And so the moment you start getting information that isn't just easy breezy information, it becomes you have an obligation to address whatever those issues are. So, yeah.
Yeah, I 100%. Because obviously, as a supervisor, you really want to enforce, where that conversation goes. Because you said something so key and so important. If you don't realize the difference between an open door policy and the violation of chain of command, you as a supervisor are putting yourself in a very vulnerable position, because that person is going to be trying to say, I'm talking to you off the record, but it's never off the record. You are never off the record as a supervisor. I don't care how well you know someone, because in the end, when pressure starts to hit, they're going to turn on you. They're going to say, well, I told you. And that was actually very key, because again, if people don't see the difference, at least we can show them that you need to protect yourself, where if you don't understand this difference after we're telling you, you're putting yourself into a position where I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to be held responsible for any type of inactions, especially if they're trying to tell you, oh, this is what's going on. And, all of a sudden it turns out there may be required action, but they're going to say, but I'm telling you this off the record. The first thing you got to tell them is, by the way, as your supervisor, or even as any supervisor, there's no dialogue off the record here. If there's going to be an action, there's going to be an action. So why don't you step out, and think if you want to tell me or not. And then come back in and tell me what you want to tell me. Or if you don't want to tell me, I'm not going to pester you for it. But there's not going to be no off dialogue here. And I see you also in agreement, Greg. I'm sure as a supervisor, did you ever deal with like maybe a subordinate or someone, you know, like let's say underneath you trying to have that, I guess, dialogue off the record?
Yeah, actually, it happened all the time. You know, when you have a relationship with staff, because we're in a tight family, you know, whether it be a jail, a prison, a hospital setting, a police force, this is our family. And a lot of times we get promoted from within. And so you get promoted to a position to where suddenly these folks that were, you know, your buddies are now your supervisor over them. And sometimes they take liberties in that. So we have to be careful that, yes, we want to have a friendly relationship. We want to have a respectful relationship. We want to give people a chance to de-stress and speak their mind sometimes, because everyone on this call and all of you listening, you all work in very high stress environments, and the ability to speak freely and to de-stress sometimes and to share what's going on is critical. But we want to be careful not to violate those professional positions that we've established through rank and through time and energy.
Well, actually, I want to touch on one more thing before we come to a close, because you touched on it, Greg, just now, and I'll go to Rob first. You mentioned something very key, man, about having an established relationship with someone, and then you start to move up, and let's say that person stays at the front line, but you continue to move up, and how that dynamic of that relationship may need to change, at least if anything, for perception. And I don't know if that's nepotism, but again, I'm sure Rob can comment on that. When you do, you know, let's say you're at the front line and you got a buddy, and then you move up and that person stays there, you know, you got to be mindful of the fact that this person may still see you as buddy and may still want to come and talk to you all the time, but you have to really control that and let that person know that, I'm sorry, man, but you also have to make sure that you respect that chain of command, because again, it's the perception of how other people are going to see that violation, including your supervisors.
Yeah, it was actually the most difficult part of the promotion for me, both times. I was fortunate enough in my agency, we prepared our future supervisors. We sent them to supervisory training before they got promoted. And that was always brought up. You know, you have to kind of disconnect from, you're not one of the guys anymore. You may have to write this guy up. You may have to be a witness against him if he does something, you know, egregious, for example. And again, that was one of the toughest things. At the end of a 3 to 11 shift, you're not going to be going out for beers anymore because you're now the supervisor. You're no longer one of the guys. And they'll test you too. You know, they'll try to see how much they can, you know, how they'll try to see where that line is and can they step over that line. And you have to be their boss. You know, you're no longer one of the guys. You're now the boss, and that's that just comes. I guess it comes with the promotion.
You know, a little sidebar here on that, and then I'll go to Connie real quick. When I became a supervisor, I actually got very lucky. I wasn't promoted as a supervisor at the same facility I originally started at. I was able to go to another facility. I worked at a maximum security facility for men, and I started my career with females. I was there with females for 8 years and change. And then when I got promoted, I went to another facility. So the cool thing about this is that I didn't have the conflict of having to become a supervisor amongst my peers who saw me as just an officer. I was able to go right into the role as a supervisor because those officers only knew me as a supervisor. So the environment nurtured my growth. And if I did have an officer that came in later on that I knew, they would be put into an environment where they had to make the adjustment, not me. Now it's harder for other officers who get promoted in the same facility because now they don't get a chance to really step into that supervisory role right away because, again, their peers around them still may see them as, hey, Joe, that's our buddy. So I really am a big fan of when you get promoted, travel out, go to another facility, develop that leadership if you have that opportunity, and then trust and believe. Once you start seeing it, you start getting respected by the new officers that meet you. Doesn't matter what facility you go to next. You've embraced the supervisory. And the hardest part of my career was making that first step into supervisory position. It wasn't, you know, me becoming, let's say, a sergeant to a superintendent. That wasn't, I mean, yeah, it's a bigger scope of things. You don't get me wrong. And I'm responsible for a lot. But to me, the biggest jump was when I had to start supervising my own people. You know, so I can learn the job, but supervising your own people, there's a finesse to it. It's different. So going to that other facility really helped me. But Connie, have you ever dealt with, like, maybe as you moved up, have you ever dealt with any of your subordinates trying to pull back on maybe like an original connection you had? And then how were you able to maintain that professionalism with that employee?
So I think it matters how you conduct yourself even prior to becoming a supervisor. So part of the experience I had was I started out on the line as a discharge planner, but I was also the union delegate. And so, and being in that role, you kind of see the good and the bad in your colleagues, right? You see when they're doing dumb stuff and they're expecting you to go there and advocate and speak up on their behalf. And you see when they're like, you know, a supervisor really did them dirty, right? So, you know, I think being able to see me in a space of objectivity, I think made it a little easier for my transition. So I ended up becoming a manager with the same people that I came up with, right? And I think the bigger challenge was I was selected over them in a short period of time. And so there were some harsh feelings for a few. And then for others, it was just like, this is what it is. Like, we're working, we got a job to do. This is what I expect. Like, I had very clear conversations with them, but it's not to say it was an easy conversation, because those conversations make you feel uncomfortable, because these are people who used to hang out with, who, you know, we broke bread together. We brought lunch in together and swapped. You take half my sandwich, I take half yours. Like, we know what's going on in each other's homes, you know? And so now here it is as a supervisor, where you wouldn't necessarily have been privy to some of the personal information that you may have on people. It can be very challenging, but I think my saving grace was that my personality now kind of was my personality then. I'm more mature now. I think I'm actually more silly now, but you know, it's like, you have to grow up and conduct yourself in a certain kind of way to command that level of respect. And I think because I had the support of my director, you know, he literally came in and was like, this is what I see in her. Like, he almost provided like justification or just his insights on the thought of why I was promoted, which I could appreciate, but also I felt it was almost a little undermining, and I don't think intentionally undermining, but either way, I just felt like when you promote with people who you came up with, it can be very challenging, but if you maintain a certain level of professionalism, no matter what, it may not be as difficult a transition as most of us would imagine that it would be.
You know, Connie, again, you hit this. If you're a professional your whole career, start from that front line up, people are going to know how you were at that front line. And when you move up, I'm assuming they're going to think, well, the professionalism still stays. You know what I mean? So you're right. Yeah, I agree. You set that expectation the moment you come in that door. This is who I am. I don't play around. I don't play games. And then obviously there's really not that big of a transition. The transition is really tough when you're a play feed and you're not professional. But for some reason, you take the test, you do good, you move up. Now people expect you to still be that play feed. But then as a supervisor, like, oh, man, I got higher level of responsibility now. So now, you know, the staff is going to try and manipulate you, but it may be harder to manipulate that person that was always professional from the get-go. And therefore, you know, if someone's going to look for you to violate that chain of command, it's not going to happen for you, because you're going to be the one that reinforces it. And you also mentioned, which was key, you also mentioned the support from the higher up. And as we touched on it before, just a reminder, that support from the higher up really reinforces that perception of authority, because that's all authority is. It's a perception. You know, and whatever you got to do, you have to protect that perception at all costs, from even how the inmates view staff. If you fail as a supervisor to protect the perception of authority from your subordinates, then you're failing to do your job and protect your staff at the highest level. And I want to mention one thing, it's a little sidebar, and guys, maybe next time we can actually have a conversation on supervising people that you once worked with as peers, but an immediate wake-up call. And again, guys, this is just for added information, a little off topic, and we'll go right back on it, is there may be a moment when you have to write up someone that you were partnered with on that front line, you know, that you were buddies, and you know it's the right thing. You have to write them, but you're dealing with the emotions of writing them. The answer is simple. You have to write them. If they did something wrong, you have to write them. Don't let emotions, make that decision for you. But I will tell you something right now, guys. When you write them, maybe that employee, that your friend may not see it the way you'd want them to see it, as it being constructive. But if that doesn't put you automatically into that role of management, both for yourself and how you're seen, because trust and believe, people, if they know you're friends with somebody, the perception could be, oh, that person's going to get away with murder now. But once that person puts you in a position where you have to write them, there should be no hesitation. And the perception of yourself is going to grow exponentially. But the key here is also the perception of how you're seen by others. Don't let emotions make that decision where I'm buddies and I'm not going to do it. You have to do the right thing. Hey, Greg, what's your thoughts on what we've been discussing? Because I saw you nodding your head in agreement.
Oh yeah, when I was working at a facility, I was in a supervisory role, middle to upper management, and one of the people in the upper management and I had a very personal relationship. We were hanging out together. Our families were hanging out together. We were grilling on the weekends. It was great. And everybody knew it. We were buddies, and things were going great. And just like we all have, I slipped. I made a mistake. It was more of a disrespect thing than it was something. It just I misspoke, did some things. Regardless, I screwed up. 100% on me. And this supervisor of mine and friend of mine made it a point to bring me in with another member of upper management and discipline me publicly, respectfully, but he did it in a way that it crushed me, but it also taught me such a valuable lesson that this guy was so dedicated to our mission and our friendship that he wanted to make sure the lines were clear. And afterwards, we did it. And that evening, he actually came over with a 6-pack and we chopped it up a little bit. And I told him how much I respected him for really letting me have it at work. So I knew, hey, this is not about friendship. This is about doing the mission. This is about staying focused on the vision. And so I absolutely agree that it is one of the hardest things to do. But if you're one of the people and you've done something, if your supervisor doesn't reprimand you, go to let them know they need to reprimand you. Be the bigger person and say, hey, you need to chew me out. Let them know that you absolutely expect that.
Yeah, I'm going to say something because you guys both touched on something, actually all three. The reason why we crossed into knowing somebody as you move up is because most of the time when people try to get into that relationship it's not really an open door policy. It's kind of in violation of an unprofessional relationship. It's because either they developed a connection with you through time, however that occurred, or they're trying to develop. So I want to make sure that we know that open door policy is not a violation of professionalism. I just want to make sure that people know that, what we're talking about now could fall under what people may say is open door, which it's not. It's using a relationship for their benefit, whether, again, they have it, I know you from when I was an officer and what can you do for me? Or, I see how this guy rolls. Maybe I can try this route with them. Either way, it's not open door. Open door is totally controlled by the supervisor. Again, they respect the lines. They know what they should and shouldn't do. But the key is at all time during that communication, they have respect for the authority beneath them. And they do whatever they can to protect that authority and therefore enabling their supervisors to be supervisors. So I thought we could just have our closing thoughts. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll unmute Rob. Rob, do you have anything you'd like to say in closing to our audience?
No, I just want to say thank you for having me on, Anthony. This was a great experience. Like you said, short notice, but I did a little research before I came on in the half hour I had. I appreciate it, and hopefully I get to talk to you guys soon.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you. We'll definitely have you on again. I thought you were great. You were very informative, and plus, I'm trying to get that other perspective, and I thought you were awesome. I will ask you off the record one day what type of research you did for that half an hour. I guess
I've been retired off the job for 8 years, so I had to do a little bit of a touch up. So
I heard Tier Talk is Googleable. Is that Googleable? Is that a word? Googleable?
I didn't see that. But I looked up some other sites as well.
Okay. All right. Hey, Greg, do you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
I think the most important thing we need to remember about chain of command and about open door policy, 2 words: trust and respect. Respect those above you and below you, and we have to trust the process. We have to trust that the things are being done and the information is flowing up and back. And it is critical that if we speak to our staff, we trust them that they can do the job. So as a captain, if I tell my lieutenants, trust that they're going to do the job. Don't step on their toes. Don't go around them and go talk to the sergeants in the front line. High-level supervisors, let your people do their jobs. I almost said a bad word. Let them do their jobs. And frontline people who are watching this today, trust your supervisors, trust your sergeants, trust your staff sergeants. Let them do their bit. Give them time to get that information up the chain. So it's trust and respect. And then, of course, as always, just do your D job.
Well, obviously, I couldn't agree with you more, 100%. Connie, do you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
I would just like to say that when we ignore the chain of command, we open the door to chaos, and that's just not what we need in the environment that we work in. And so, just be reminded that when you do jump the chain of command, you look bad, right? Like, you look bad to the person you came to and to your supervisor, because they want to understand why you're trying to circumvent the process. And if you can't justify why you're circumventing the process, it really makes for some kinks in that working relationship. So do your best to follow the chain of command and make sure that you are not the one who's inviting chaos into the process.
Guys, I think we hit home with a lot of points today. If you watched the whole video, there was a lot of things that we discussed, but I definitely think Connie just summed it up by saying violating that chain of command really leads to chaos. And I think that's pretty much just a great summary of what we discussed. And I want to know something. Now, I want you guys to know something. We're good at what we do, so we kind of just wing it and we see where the conversation goes. We try not to prepare dialogue because I think that only limits where we can travel. I had no idea, again, this is the audience here, that we would be focusing a lot from the top down. I thought that a big part of our dialogue was going to be from the bottom up, because that's where you see the game being played. But here's the key, guys. We have to allow that to happen. So it was great that the dialogue happened at its source, the source being the top. Game can't be played at the bottom if the source doesn't allow it. So it was great to see where the dialogue actually turned to be, because I think this will be a good discussion for our supervisors, because if they set the tone, then those that are trying to manipulate the system by circumventing authority, they're just not going to be able to do it because the tone's been set from above. Okay, Greg, you want to say something? You're unmuted?
Yep, I have another movie quote for you. Attitude reflects leadership. Attitude reflects leadership. So if you as leader have an attitude of, whatever, the whole team is going to have that. So the attitude of your team, the attitude of your facility is a direct reflection of the leadership of the facility.
Okay, so to see if the people actually watch this whole video, put what film you think that's from in the comments, and I'll know that you watched the whole video. And obviously, I definitely know you watched the whole video once you compliment us on how Connie does the closing. Go ahead, Connie.
I am not.
Connie.
I'm not even trying again. No.
Connie,
it's Greg's turn.
Connie, there have been requests.
No, it's Greg's turn.
Greg, can you give us a closing, please?
Make sure that you reach out to Tier Talk. Make sure you look up warriorfoundation.us. Make sure you follow along Operation Swift Mask and GuardianRFID.com for all the latest in correctional news and information. And if you like what you've heard today so far, engage, hit that bell so that you can find out every time you see Tony's face right there in the camera, because Tier Talk is here for you. Stay safe, everybody. Good night. God bless. And we will see you again soon.
I love it, guys. Stay safe. And don't forget, I have links in the description. Please check out Wounded Blue TV. And I think it's something you'll enjoy. It's being done by Randy Sutton. As always, guys, stay safe.